Blood-Soaked Rapture. Part 1. Fracturing. Day 1. Fitting in fear, a day's exhaustion, a single deliberate cut. 1. Stuck in a prison of his own. Section 2. Jacob stopped the memory with a closing of his eyes in a mournful downward stare, as they both agreed he would have to leave the child behind so he could survive. A small growl escaped through the long matted hair of Jacob's facial hair, most of his greasy hair falling in long threads around his face too, giving him a tiny warmth and shelter so the enemies wouldn't see his eyes glittering in the night before they were killed in a quick mercy. The aggression in the noise held the demand, and the child accepted it with a grim resolution which should have been impossible for such a young child. It was easy, though, for one contained in the metal bodysuit that twisted and broke their bones, heated to burn away parts of their flesh, closing the fires off in sections and keeping the child caged by the insurmountable weight of it. "You are released." The words fell from Jacob like so much granite, cracked apart with the dull thump of his haggard breaths punctuating it. Slowly, Jacob pressed his hands down on the release switch. The bright red of the child's peeled, raw body glowed, and Jacob did not wince. Struggling, dizzied, as he watched the golden pupil unfocus and spill into swirls like ink in a stir pot, and with it a sickly, swelling heat. "It's my great pleasure," Jacob said, pulling himself away so the child couldn't remember him as someone warming themselves on its destruction, not wanting to watch another death. He pulled himself up and sprinted, tilted forward and nearly on all fours, away from the lashing flames. The reverberations of its death struck through the ground, and he ran all the faster, pushing against the slimy fluid of the sick earth. It ruptured like the squelching of an engorged spot, splashing a long stretch of chitinous fluid, and he struggled through the air, clawing with his weak hands at the fluid. Around him he sensed the coming wrath, the heavy weight booming as if it was clashing hands squeezing on his skin tightly. They had sensed the fluid of the child's blood as its wounds ruptured, the squeezing churning of gears, a feeling matched in its vacuum chest, as he collapsed to the floor with just a glimpse of his people's fires where their waste had hissed and boiled on the flames to keep themselves hidden. People fitfully slept by the incredible fear they would drawl and only be left behind as a trampled ruin of sinewy and chewed through bone. The better option compared with the sick art of distorted body parts stretched across the canvas of their pale skin, with swirls of blood and waste in a sickening script that churned the eyes and left some pinned to the ground in their unblinking hypnotism. A crash victim of bone squelched free out of the slime of the world's decayed surface. The disease overrode the musculature of each body, fibers of it stretching across the gaps between the known different towns, crawling horrors of open mouths, globules of writhing flesh which mindlessly conjoined the world with its sensitive fibers. Those bodies flopped down from the material of the planet, and for a moment in the blackness of the depth beneath the skin of the world, he saw an immense valley of intelligence staring back at him with an insatiable hunger at the coming ecstasy of devouring coming so close. He laid useless, eclipsed beneath a mountainous singularity that focused on him for just a moment, which seemed to scream with the resonance of all the infected millions, ingested into its unstoppable infection, the weight of continents of meat splashing back at him as if he were standing in a misguided defiance against an angered star. He saw the child's innocent face, remembering the giggle which had shot out of its face when he had watched a mouse jumping and playing through his hands, at the stretching elongation of his face when she had first taken his hand in hers, and without knowing why, yet caught himself standing up once more. Jacob's sleeping body was sweating, his prematurely aged face creasing deeply in a pained frown as he fought against another sick image. He twisted and churned under his sheets, kicking out the images of the decimated corpses as so much decoration splashed across his sight. He pulled his eyes upwards as if he was being tugged down by heavy weights, groaning half words as the chokehold of fear surrounded him and left him still in the picture of this coming slaughter. The picture fell to a grayscale as he forced the nightmare to stop. He stared at the low light of his room, concentrating on the soft material and the comfort of his armchair, but it was the old red material of his grandfather's chair instead, and the curdling sickness of this new reality where he wasn't permitted to wake writhed over him slowly as the realization clarified. Like the weight of pressurized lungs straining as he held his breath, he felt the presence of the pursuing constant when he was in this state. He held the heaviness of overwhelmed fear from the childhood which felt like so long ago, but where he was caged and lashed under the coming beast. It was as if he was still the child waiting in the night while the nightmare pursued him, physically marching away while still in sleep, as if those tiny steps could take him away from the encroaching monstrosity. He pulled his eyes up even harder, a valley of sick lust following the attempt, and this time he was still laid down, staring down the short space to the thick wooden front door. He stilled his body, tensing with the crash of the rampant heart wetly thumping in his head, looking across the ruffles of a jacket and a winter coat, tracing a line along the neat lines of trainers, work shoes and walking boots, slippers all correct and geometric. He let a soft breath out, pushing it tenuously through his scrubbed teeth, and felt the clack of a piercing tap against the inside of his mouth. This was another worse case, where his body itself betrayed him, and he felt the crawling hand moving like an alien against him. The ripped-apart sections of flesh clawed towards him with a sick strength. Extended tendrils of its skeletal ruin jutted wetly as it flinched from the long, rusted cables conjoined and through the hands of raw nerves, and he groped in a tight spasm, the stinging rivulets of sweat running ahead of the dense weight of the wrenching pain from his ruined half. The shredded cause of his injuries spread, his sight leaving his body as it stared at the undead fleshy desecration, as if he had been trampled by the onslaught of a beast dragging him through barbed metal. It pulled in a dream, strong as a memory, the endlessly crushed but still clawing defiance of the long demolished ruins of the soldier who had rebuilt himself beyond any recognition of a man. It was as if in the drenched mud now, forcing the corpse he'd clawed apart to stretch over his demolished body. The hand was still animated by his masters, the echoes of their thick gurgling tongue commanding the body to fight and pull against him. The long stretches of their tendrils stretched into the infinity of the watching darkness above him, and he was a tiny insignificance as his real body stretched and pushed his head into the sweat-soaked pillow, straining as it jerked, trying to run from the nightmare's weight, before he squeezed tightly into a fetal position for the little comfort it once granted him.